Kathy Forte. Welcome to the Bookaholic podcast.
Well, good morning, Deirdre.
Yes. Quite the time difference right now. 5
Yes, it
a.m.
is.
where you are.
Yes, aloha from Maui.
Wow. Well, at least you're surrounded by beauty.
That's right, but it's still dark here right now.
Exactly. Well, today we're going to introduce my audience to your thriller, Stacks Library of Truth. And, this really touches with me because, first of all, I love thrillers and mysteries. I'm not a sci-fi person, but you do say it's a little bit of sci-fi. But there's so much in here that I love. So I'm very intrigued. But before we dive into Stacks, let's find out a little bit more about Kathy. And you have had a very interesting, amazing transition from being a journalist and psychologist, clinical psychologist, to becoming a writer. And I always kind of sort of ask my guests this question, and that they tell me various things, but you transitioned to this new role of writer due to a near death experience. Tell us about that.
Well, I had my near-death experience back in 2003, and I was still practicing. I was living in Santa Monica, California, where I had my private practice. And I was leaving work one day, and I had this incredible feeling like something had just left my body, a big whoosh. And I had, under my solar plexus area, it was a very strange feeling. And immediately I felt like, you're done with your work here. You're done. And I thought, am I getting ready to die? Because I felt really empty. I felt like all my best friends had left. I was empty. And I immediately went into my analytical mode. Well, what's this about? And if I'm not getting ready to die, well, I have to feel this the rest of my life, this feeling of emptiness, and there was nothing going on in my life at the time that would have, no depression, no anxiety. My life was going pretty well. And
Right.
so I went home trying to analyze what this strange emptiness feeling was. And as I was doing that, all of a sudden I saw this swirling vortex in my head. And the next thing I was sucked into this tunnel, horizontal, feet first, traveling at a high rate of speed. And I could see light at the end of this tunnel. And of course, immediately I thought, oh my gosh, is this the tunnel everybody's been talking about? And if so, did I just die? And if I wasn't sick, so I thought, well, what did I die of? I didn't know at the time my heart had stopped. And so I thought, well, there's not much you can do about it. These thoughts go through your head and you say, well, if I'm dead, there's not much I can do. So let's just go for it and see what this light everybody's been talking about is about.
Right.
But I got stopped before I could go into the light. And it came to like a screeching halt, and I just hovered there. And I even tried to wheel myself into the light, but nothing worked. And I had this thought like, well, this is boring. And with that thought, all of this energy, this new energy poured into me. I mean, it was like an implosion, and it spun me back around, sent me back through the tunnel as fast as could be. And there were voices in my head saying, breathe, Kathy, breathe. And I knew in that moment that they were trying to get me to breathe back into my physical body. My heart had stopped. When I got back into my physical body, my whole left side was paralyzed. And, and I always laugh and joke that, when you're a psychologist and you start hearing voices in your head, it's not a good thing. But I was alone. There was nothing I could do about it, So I just paid attention to these voices, and they just said, relax, breathe, everything will be okay. And I could feel them reconnecting my left side of my physical body back to, that it was back online, you might say. And I could hear clicks in my head as they were doing it. And the next thing I felt this like little pressure in my chest. And I thought, oh, I'm going to have to see a cardiologist now because my heart had stopped. I don't know why it stopped, but it did. And these voices said to me, no, everything's okay. You don't need to see a doctor. You'll be all right. But within 24 hours of coming back from this experience, I was obsessed with quantum physics. And I was having to get up in the middle of the night, 3 or 4 a.m. every night to get to research all these ideas going through my head. And when I got on the computer, I was understanding them, which was very strange. And these voices were correcting what I was seeing on the screen. They go, well, that's not quite accurate yet, but that's as far as the human race, in essence, has its understanding of it. And so this went on night after night. And I'd go back in the morning and I go see clients, and I was feeling all of their emotional stuff, their anger, everything. So I was like oversensitized, and this did not feel good. And so, I talked to a friend of mine who's a medical intuitive, and he had worked with me on very difficult cases in the past, with the client's permission. He didn't want to know anything about them, and he would just know their name. And he would look behind to see what was going on from a soul perspective, which could be very helpful for me as a therapist to guide them through whatever it was, their journey, and their issue. And so I called him and I just said, can you look and see what's going on with me? I didn't tell him anything about what had happened. Right. And he was gone for quite some time. And he goes, and then he finally came back and he goes, wow, you almost died. He says, but all your old guidance left. That was that whoosh feeling and that emptiness. He says, you have a whole new set of guides now, and they're very technologically oriented, very geeky. And my first thing was, what do they want? And he said, this looks like a soul contract. You had a decision that you made. You could have kept going, died, or you could have come back to do this. And they said, it looks like you're going to invent some type of software or some type of medical device. He goes, I'm not quite sure, but they're showing me. And I just laughed and I said, I don't know I don't know anything about inventing electronics, software devices. And I thought, he's finally wrong. His batting average had been pretty good up until that point. And, but, it became like this magnificent obsession. I couldn't let go of it. So, it took 5 years to develop the Trinfinity 8 and Ascension 11 software, which is used all over the world. It's a holistic healing software, and it's all based on mathematical algorithms. And they were giving me all this stuff, and math was my worst subject in school. I mean, I may have, gotten a Ph.D., but I struggled through math. It was like a Greek language to me. So I thought, this is a cosmic joke. They're entrusting me with some type of mathematical device, and I hate math. But they pretty much showed that everything in our universe has a mathematical signature to it. And you just kind of need to speak to the cells of the body in a language it understands, which is math. So it was a whole new awakening for me. And after that experience, I became extremely much more intuitive. I mean, if we get to the Stacks books, I woke up in the middle of the night, just like Martin Luther King, I had a dream,
Oh my gosh.
And the whole plot was there. The whole plot was there. It was a story that wanted to be told. And, I started writing down the plot elements, and so forth like that. And at the time I was living in New York, and I was taking a pilot writing course, television pilot. And so I thought, I'll just use this to, this plot. And, the instructor at UCLA just loved it. And he said, you should enter this into the slam dance contest. And it was one of the finalists for original thing. But at the time, it was the writer's strike. Nothing was going on. So I kind of put things on the shelf. And then when COVID happened, I thought, I've got some time now. This UCLA instructor always said, this needs to be a book. I think this has enough legs to be a book. And I thought it was going to be one book, and it turned out to be 3 books.
Oh my God. So first of all, Kathy, let me just say this. We could have had an interview alone based on your near-death experience.
I had a life.
So let's just get that off our chest. Let's rewind a little bit and go back to your near-death experience, because it's quite fascinating of how you got from there to writing Stacks. And when you left your job that day, so you're walking to your car, let's say, and you felt that emptiness?
Whoosh, that feeling right out of the solar plexus. Like it was like a whoosh.
It's like somebody
somebody just took something out. And, this may sound very strange to people, but I didn't know that, your guidance, when it's gone, when it leaves, or, so forth like that, it leaves an empty feeling. I read, many books on this, and no one's ever talked about that,
I didn't know
which was
that.
very strange. So I immediately, I did not, I mean, I'd had clients who had near-death experiences, but no one had ever talked about, your old guidance leaving and possibly something new coming in to help you with whatever you're working on at that point in your journey of life. Yeah.
Wow. And the guidance part, that's something I didn't know about, your guidance. I did not know that. Now, so you're walking to your car. There was nobody seeing you saying, ma'am, are you okay? Or none of that.
No, but my last client of the day was a Buddhist nun. And she had said to me, it was like I think I finished up at 9 p.m. It was a late night for me. And she said, this is the night of the Wesak moon. And of course, I didn't know what a Wesak moon was. And so I asked her, and she goes, it's when the veils are thin between the dimensions and anything can happen. And I do remember looking up at the moon. Yes. I mean, the story gets even more bizarre. And so when I was going out to my car, I did look up at the moon, and it looked like any other moon to me, but Wesak, it's Wesak, and it usually happens in the beginning of May. And every year,
it's coming up.
Oh, that's right. I think yeah.
Lord.
And so obviously, I was a good little exit point for me on the Wesak moon, but life throws you some curveballs every now and then. You don't know what to expect, and I certainly wouldn't have expected something like that to happen.
Absolutely not. Okay, so step 2, when you're whooshing through this tunnel, you're at home.
Yes. Thank God it didn't happen while I was driving home.
It happened while you were driving?
No, I said, thank goodness it didn't happen while I was driving home. It happened while I was home.
Oh my goodness. So
yes.
you were at home.
I was just sitting up. I was drinking some tea. And of course, when I came back into my body, the tea was all over the place. So obviously I dropped it. But yeah, no, I was just, I was wide awake. It wasn't a dream or sleeping or anything like that. So yeah, I was definitely aware of the whole process.
Wow. And you could have continued on down the tunnel, which we assume that you would have died, but you didn't.
Yes. Dying's easy. Living is hard. That's what I discovered.
Oh, yeah. Oh.
I mean, I had all my faculties. I could still think, obviously I didn't still have my physical vehicle body, but I had my soul body, and I was still Kathy, in that body.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wow. Now I will tell you, and I know this is kind of going off script. I've talked to another author, and she was more of an intuitive nature type of individual. But anyway, I told her the story about how one night, not immediately after my mother had passed away, but still maybe within that same year or the next year after she had passed, I was in the bed sleeping. I have a husband, so he's on the other side. And so I'm sleeping, and all of a sudden I feel this extremely, extremely, extremely loving, warm, beautiful hug. It was so loving and beautiful and warm, and it just felt very light. And it just lasted, and it just made me feel so good. I've never felt so good in all of my life, except for that moment. And when I came out of that, I was like, oh, wow, my husband was just really nice and really affectionate and so loving. And I look over at him, and he's dead asleep, totally facing the other wall, just completely about to fall out of the bed. So I said, well, that wasn't him. And because I am a spiritual person, I just chalked it up to that was my mother visiting me. And so
you said what I knew it was your mother. Yes.
Yes. And so, and she and I had a contentious relationship. And I think she came to tell me I did love you. I didn't maybe say that I love you, but I did love you. and so that always brought me a lot of peace, and so the reason why I'm saying all of this to you is that I totally believe you. I totally believe you because things do happen to people. I think the author was telling me that that was a spiritual visitation. So we can have visitations, and all of these type of things. And I think because of the work that you were doing, even though it was very logical and technical, that's another thing. Sometimes when you're so logical, stuff likes to happen to you to prove it's not all about logic.
Rock your world a little bit, right? Right. Well,
Yes.
I made a deal with my own mother. I said, when you pass, if you can contact me, please do. And she did within 24 hours. And I felt that same love that you had, And
Oh,
then unfortunately, the phone rang in the kitchen, and because this happened in a dream state, and it was very vivid and that
yeah.
huge love. And I turn around and there's my mother, and she's looking as young as ever. And she just wanted to say, she started to tell me about the death process. And then the phone rang in the other room with a cousin calling through about your mother dying and everything else. And I was woken right up, and I told my sister, and she goes, can you get back in there and go dream again and see what else happens? So I said, it doesn't work that way.
No, oh my goodness, that is amazing, 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 amazing. Oh gosh, Kathy, we could really talk about that, but the means to the end is stacks, and you had being a journalist and a psychologist, you mentioned that you changed, and all of a sudden you had creativity, and you hated math as I hated math, and I studied journalism at UNC Chapel Hill and to avoid math. No, I really love journalism, but
when you
I
take your
like
GRE, you still have to do the math component, the graduate records exam.
exactly, still have to do math. And so you got all of this from this spirit now, or this this transition. You got all of this from that. So all you had to just obey everything and write these books.
I take orders well, I guess. But I did have a client once who had a near-death experience, and she had told me, I went to this place where I could find all of this knowledge, and it was all true and everything else. And she goes, I didn't want to leave. And I said, kind of like a library of truth. And she goes, yes. And that stuck in my subconscious. So when they told me I should name it Stacks, but the library of truth came from that client that I had in that interaction with. And so the interesting thing is that when I started to write this book, and was, planning it all out and how it would, over 3 books, my guidance, my new guidance had said, make sure you get to the Library of Congress no later than the first week in March 2020 to do your information, your research. And I thought, well, what's the rush? I was leading a group to Egypt at the time. And I said, okay. So I made my reservations. And then when I got, so I went there the first week in March, and, I contacted congressmen and the librarian of the main reading room so I could get behind the scenes in the stacks and, see all the things that all the people normally don't get to see. So I could have accuracy in this book. So if an employee of the Library of Congress was reading it, they could say, oh, hey, that's pretty accurate. She got it right. And so after spending a wonderful week in the Library of Congress all day, every day, and with my friends who had worked in Congress to get the kind of the behind the scenes stuff of Washingtonian politics, I came home, and a week later, the whole country shut down for COVID, and so did the Library of Congress. And I never would have had that opportunity had I not listened to that, that small voice inside those guys said, make sure no later than the first week in March. Of course, they didn't tell me a pandemic was going to shut down the country, but good thing I listened, because it was closed for over a year.
Sure. I'm like your sister. Can you go back and go in a few states so that we can be there recording, writing down what's happening? Because I'm telling you, this stuff you're talking about is, it's unbelievable, but I believe you.
Yeah,
It's
some people might call
amazing.
it woo, but it's my life, and that's
Oh,
that's it.
oh, wow, amazing, amazing. Well, so your wonderful research that you got to do brought us what I think is going to be three wonderful books, and I can't wait to get my hands on them. You got me at the Library of Congress, so
Oh,
I love that.
it is
I
such a
love that. And so
fascinating place. All the symbology, the architecture, the Masonic symbology in there. It was a perfect setting for this
yes,
book to find an interdimensional portal within the library
yes,
the library of truth.
yes,
So,
yes.
yeah, perfect.
Well, this is very interesting when you talk about the Masonic symbols. A few years back at my church, we had to lay a cornerstone. And so it was very important. But it was a process where we had to call in some local masons, and they're the only people that's allowed to lay those cornerstones.
Mm, mm.
And when I had to pick up a birth certificate the other day. I went to the courthouse to go to the Register of Deeds. And as I was walking along the pathway, on the building was a big block, quartz or whatever block that had the Mason symbol on there, because that's a cornerstone of that building. And then that's what you're saying, the Masons are the only ones that can lay that cornerstone. So that's why that's there. And that in and of itself, the Freemasons and all of that's very
Washington is
intriguing.
laid out on ley lines. I mean, it was planned by our founders, who
Yes,
were pretty much all Masons. And,
yes,
the Library of Congress goes back to Thomas Jefferson. He's the one that
right,
started it. And
right.
he started with his own collection. And then I saw all these Minerva statues all over the Library of Congress, and I'm like, so,
Really?
there was some things I just wrote into the book, and it's even, I started writing the first chapter in the main reading room there, the big rotunda main reading room, which you need a reader's card to get into. You can't just waltz in there. And, and I'm looking up at this huge clock that's got Father Time on, and it's gold and it's quite ornate. And it wasn't keeping it was totally the wrong time. And I'm thinking, why do they have a clock in the main reading room that doesn't keep the right time? And I mentioned it to somebody, and she goes, oh, that clock has never kept the right time. And so, I wove it into the story.
Wow. So Stack's Library of Truth has been described as a fast-paced, thought-provoking story that is tailored for fans of the X-Files who want to know more of the alien forces that exist beyond our conceptions. The story revolves around a library employee at the Library of Congress who accidentally unearths a dark agenda by those in power. Okay, so my sons were younger. They were in like that preteen, the teen area. We're talking about the Illuminati, and that that goes through the teenage years, and people are fascinated by it. We just spoke about the Freemasons, and we know that there's always been, the shadowy thoughts about the Freemasons and all of this kind of stuff. So tell
My
us a
mic
little
just
bit
went out. There we go. All right.
There we go. So tell us a little bit about this dark, those in power and all of this kind of thing. I love it. I love these kind of conspiratorial types of books and movies.
Well, the character is also very unique. I drew on my psychology background,
Oh yeah.
and gave him. He has acquired savant syndrome, which is something that you acquire, but it's usually he acquired it from a baseball injury as a young child at 7 years old, and kind of rewired his mind differently, where he now has synesthesia, which means he sees the world in numbers. You can see it in colors
Oh,
and music and everything else. He sees the world in numbers, which is perfect for my new number background and knowledge. And I
yes.
mean, he sees people as numbers.
Wow.
And he sees, slices of pizza. What's the slice of pizza number or whatever?
Right. Right. Right.
But this becomes like a blessing and a curse in many ways, and it actually helps him to unearth, and through the help of an investigative journalist, television journalist, who becomes his deep throat. He tries to divulge some of the stuff he's finding in the Library of Truth that are, corporations, the bad guys and everything have been using to manipulate mankind since time immemorial, you might say.
Yes.
And to stay alive. And he's very savvy at computers, and he's a system analyst, and he speaks like six. I mean, because he can learn a language like in 1 or 2 nights. He's a savant.
Right.
Yeah. So it's all the characters have foibles, and a character arc. And so they're very believable. And each of them has drawn on some psychopathology that I've addressed in my therapy office over the years.
Yes. Well, you had all the right foundations to write such a book, even before your experience, though. Being a journalist yourself, and that's who helps the young man in the book, Zach. The psychology that would help you to create characters in and of itself, based on truths and all of these kind of things. So it's kind of like, I feel like your whole life has set you up to this part, to this point, to bring in the world this book. And, for you to be a debut author, to take on something so complex, and then you make it into a series. It's a series of 3 books. That's amazing, Kathy. I mean, I have to say you were meant to do this.
Well, I have a friend who's very psychic, and she said, this looks like there might be a 4th book in here. And I said, there's not enough for 4 books. And so I was riding down the highway in Maui one day, and I wasn't even thinking about the book. And I thought, oh, I see a possible 4th book 20 years later. In there. And so it's when I finished the 3rd book, and the 3rd book just came out this week, which is the first book is Stack's Library of Truth, 2nd book is Stack's Awakening Truth, and the 3rd one is Stack's Truth Will Set You Free.
Oh,
yes. And I knew that, I finished my baby, and I kind of was feeling lost, and I realized this kind of feels like some type of postpartum depression. I'm done. And I thought, I've never, and I Googled it, and there was like this one obscure article about that writers don't talk about. Sometimes they get postpartum depression. Their baby is born, and what do they do now? It doesn't matter if the book is successful or not. They still feel this loss of, I escaped into my world of Stacks for a couple of years, and I loved it there. And now, and so I about a week of that, and I said, okay, I start writing the 4th book.
Oh, wow. Wonderful. So, what year does Stacks take place in originally?
There's no year on it. I did that purposely.
Oh, yeah. Okay. And then, so once you got back home from the Library of Congress and we fell into the pandemic, so did you feel like you had plenty of time to just be engrossed in writing the book out?
Yes, the first book was written, I lived in Prescott, Arizona at the time. I wrote the first book there. The 2nd and 3rd book were written here in Maui. And so it brings in the 2nd book parts of Maui, and because there's more than one portal.
Oh, and this portal is in your book is actually inside the Library of Congress.
Yes, it's in the Stacks.
Oh, it's within the Stacks. Yes. Oh, yes. Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
And like I said, the general public never gets to go into the Stacks. This is where all the reference materials are. I mean, it's not as nicely, the architecture isn't nearly as nice as the rest of the building. And but it's got the old catalog files in there, handwritten in black ink from the 1800s. Some of the entries of it's unbelievable. And it was cold like a meat locker to preserve all those books. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Amazing.
Yeah, I was taking pictures everywhere. In fact, the cover
they let you take pictures.
I took that picture inside the main reading room. I snuck it because you're not supposed to have a camera in there, and I snuck that picture. That's my picture. Yeah.
Oh gosh. Well, Kathy, this is totally fascinating. Totally fascinating. We may have to have you back on the channel to see, are you going to conclude, or are you going to write some more books? What's your feeling about writing other books with other characters?
I don't know yet. I'll still write this fourth book. I mean, it does conclude to a good point in the third book of the trilogy series. Okay. So the fourth book, I can take my time on that because it's 20 years later, and you want to find out what happens to little Izzy, who's a very psychic child, and so forth like that. So it's like people will be okay with how it ends, and it ends in a way nobody would anticipate. It's not one of those, it was only a dream or something like that. It's nothing like that. Right. And it's it gets into some, people read this book and they go, are you sure this is sci-fi? Are you sure this is fiction? This sounds a lot like a nonfiction fiction book.
Wow. Well, Kathy, when you think about, like even the presidency, there's only been 45 people that have received that book of secrets. There's supposedly a book of secrets that presidents get. And I mean, I'm assuming that it's codes and maybe, nuclear codes or whatever have you, but they get this book when they become president. Files, right. And then there's that. Then there's other things, Roswell. Then there's things like the Freemasons we were talking about. Then there's like, I watch a show called American Horror Story. It's an anthology show. It's awesome. And one time in that show, they had the powers that be that were, creating all this stuff and maneuvering all this stuff behind the scenes for millions of, people, citizens. And it was all the tech guys. It was all the guys that own Twitter, Facebook, and all of this stuff. So,
you don't get to be famous without paying some dues.
This is true. This is true. And I've always told my sons, and, people don't get to be super, super rich without having to done something.
Yes. I heard plenty of those stories in Hollywood clients. And so, I know some of the dark stuff that goes behind the scenes there. And, it's sort of like, so when you write these, I mean, I knew certain things that were going on. And I have to say, this could be another story. I've done digs in Mexico for alien artifacts and so forth like that. And I have seen some things that defy that I definitely know that there are other beings from other places here. And people ask me, well, your guidance, where are they from? And they pretty much told me they were from the 8th dimension and beyond. And he says, we're only in the 3rd dimension here. There's 12 dimensions, and all those dimensions are within each other, like those Matryoshka Russian nesting dolls, like a doll within a doll within a doll. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Oh. And sometimes what happens on one dimension bleeds through and other dimensions. They can see what's going on ours. We can't necessarily see what's going on the upper dimensions. But basically it was told that humans, the soul comes into matter and can manipulate matter and have their experiences in the 3rd dimension, not in the 1st or 2nd. So this is our first incarnations, you might say, into physical matter and playing with that. So I learned a lot of things I didn't know about in the origins of man and so forth like that. So they were very they were very helpful. They answered a lot of questions. It's sort of like I tapped into my own library of truth.
Oh my gosh, Kathy. Kathy, I have to when I go to Hawaii, I'm going to have to meet with you.
Yeah.
You're going to have to tell me some more stuff. This is amazing. I mean, and I didn't know that there was 12 dimensions. But you know what? Oh my gosh. I know this is totally not the same thing.
Oh, and there's new ones that can be born in time. That's yeah. We're not, it's the universe is infinite at this point. And, and I found that the sun was a portal, and that energy comes through that sun, through through actually a portal through source, and it's sucked back out through like black holes, reprocess the creative thing. And that's like the blood, the veins, the flow that keeps creation and this universe from collapsing upon itself. It gets very complicated, but it's really interesting stuff.
Oh my gosh, I am just mind blown. And I am just thinking about other dimensions. And you know the group, the fifth dimension, back from a
Oh yeah,
long
yeah,
time
yeah,
ago.
yeah, yeah.
And I'm like, is that where their name came from?
Well, they say that that's kind of where many souls will go from. They're going to kind of, it's a long story about what happened to the fourth dimension, but pretty much will go to a fifth dimensional place called Terra. And it's quite different. I saw what it looks like there. And hey, when I leave this earth, I want to go back. I want to go to Terra.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So you're leading me to A, read your books, and B, I'm doing some investigation today on that Wesak moon, which is coming up,
Yes.
and then these dimensions. Oh, Kathy, this has been a fascinating interview. You have blown my mind. I guess I'll go back and see my mouth is dropped open, which is very unattractive and not proper at all for one's mouth to just drop open several times on a video. But wow, you've blown my mind. So, folks, if your mind has been blown like mine by Kathy Forte, please take a look at the podcast show notes and the description box below the video on my YouTube channel. Will have all of Kathy's contact information and how you can purchase Stacks, Library of Truth, and the other 2 books in the trilogy. Can't wait for the 4th one. I haven't even read the first one. Kathy.
By the way, you can get it on Amazon or Barnes & Noble. It's available Kindle, print, and the first book is available in Audible as well. Or they can go to my website, stackslibraryoftruth.com.
Perfect. And we'll have that, like I said, in those show notes and the video description box. Kathy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Deirdre. Sorry I blew your mind.
In a very good way. Very good way. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Have a great day. And aloha.